Well, I have to say that was absolutely fascinating, and I have about 6 or 7 questions that I'd like to ask, but I'm just going to ask one and then open it up to the audience. You spoke of the vast rift between the people of Pakistan and how they feel about the West, the U.S. in particular, but about the West. And the book that many of us read prior to you coming here today talked about that as well, and said that the failure of the West had been in that we had too much of a military strategy and not enough of a nation-building strategy. And so by that, meaning investing in other, in infrastructure projects and investing in the people. What is your perspective on how the general population could improve their views about the West? And it sounds to me like we're at a place where, we can't. We have an expectation that they're going to embrace the values of the West, but at this point it sounds like it would be well off if it was at least neutral. So I'm wondering if you could give us your thoughts on how to fix this or how to move this ahead.
If we are talking of Pakistan, we were talking of certainly, I would say that understanding Pakistan's interests and Pakistan's sensitivities. We are also an independent state. We have certain sensitivities of ours which must be understood by the United States and the West. Like I said on the nuclear issue, this is it's a pride of every Pakistani in the streets of Pakistan. So anyone talking or casting aspersions on trying to hint even at undoing Pakistan's nuclear potential is totally and completely unacceptable to every single Pakistani. Now we must understand that. And it is there because of certain reasons. It is defensive against the existential threat that is posed on us. And then other interests, like as I said, we were the strategic partner of the United States. So therefore, all of a sudden imposing sanctions on Pakistan, these go against our national interests. So today, we have certain sensitivities, we have certain interests. Please take cognizance of those sensitivities and interests. Even when, for example, President Obama goes to India, we are supposed to be the great strategic partners against terrorism and all that. We suffered floods where thousands of people were killed. I thought it's in the fitness of things to at least sympathize with us. Go to Pakistan and at least say that you great partner of ours, we feel very sorry that you suffered so much from your floods. How do people of Pakistan take all this? You go to India, you have strategic relations, very good. So these are sensitivities which we must understand. So therefore, if you call on the other issues, these are issues of sensitivities, but other than that, of course, as far as the presence of US forces and coalition forces in Afghanistan are concerned, that goes against popular demand. It goes against the people of Afghanistan, it goes against the people of Pakistan. They don't want US forces or foreign forces there. However, having said that, now that we are in it, now if we quit without putting a stable, that may be going against public opinion, but I said the job of leadership, even in Pakistan, stands to put the correct picture in front of the people and change the public opinion on this issue. But we have to now go on some serious political and socio-economic track more than the military to resolve this problem in Afghanistan and then plan to quit. So there's no quick fix solution, frankly, that we can do something immediately, because we have lost over these last 20 years, after 89, we are losing. And now we want to convert and suddenly we want to be popular again. It will take time.
I'm having some difficulty seeing, but I know that the gals are there with the microphone, so please just wave your hands. I see a fellow there. Sorry, we've got Mike Walker first, and then we'll go over there.
Mr. President, thank you very much for a very stimulating and I think very illuminating discussion of the problems of your part of the world. In fact, I've never heard a better description of the problem and the potential solution. I was particularly taken by your view that the most important thing to do is to improve the institutions and the infrastructure of Pakistan. Now, as I was reading a little of your history in preparation for coming here today, I was struck by the fact that your coming to power in Pakistan was basically in defense of the premier institution of the rule of law in Pakistan, the Supreme Court. Now, that having been said, we all, and I think we all in this room, were business people and or related to business activities, understand that it is the rule of law, that it's the fundamental institution in a country that has to be protected. But you know, as I do, we at the Fraser Institute measure the institutions of the world. We measure all 142 countries for which we can get data. And one of the things that is striking about Pakistan at this moment is the almost total absence of the rule of law and protection of private property. And I would like you, there must be something here I'm missing, because when people say, we want to develop our infrastructure, we want to develop our institutions, the first thing they have to do is to develop their own fundamental institutions. And I hope you might have something hopeful and promising to tell us about either what's happening now or what you would do if you do come back, and I hope you do come back. You are a terrifically courageous and inspirational person. I hope you do go back into the politics of Pakistan. Well, what would you do to solve this fundamental problem?
Thank you very much, sir. You are absolutely right. I think our enforcement of laws, we have a lot of laws. We have laws on everything, good laws, but their implementation is not there. Implementation is not there because the weakness of the law enforcement agencies and the judiciary, may I say, without any reservations. Unfortunately, our judiciary does not have the capacity. Unfortunately, those people who join our judiciary are really the lower cadre of students who go and study law. I remember I have studied in Lahore, which is the center of learning in Pakistan, and there were 3 institutions, the government college, the Foreign Christian college where I studied, and Islamia college. People used to go through these 3, and those who couldn't get admission anywhere used to end up in law college. And that happens to be the case. And that is the product that joins the that is the product which joins the judiciary. So unfortunately, we have to and then we need to bring about certain judicial reforms in which I wouldn't like to dwell in, but I do not have total understanding of those laws, but I do understand there are many issues where we can bring about reforms to improve the judiciary. In my time, we introduced many reforms which frankly were not fully implemented and now have been undone even. So I think we need to have judicial reforms. On the police, the law enforcement, unfortunately the police force is lacks training. Their pay scales are such that they end up in a lot of corruption. So we need to enhance their pay scales according to the powers that they wield, and then we need to train them better. I would say the solution lies in strengthening more second line forces, which we have. The Frontier Corps in Baluchistan and Frontier, and we have Rangers in Sindh and Punjab. These are officered by Army, Pakistan Army, and they perform far, far better because of the officers that come from the army. I feel that they need to be enlarged in scope and increased in strength, and also the police needs to be improved. So these are measures which need to be taken to improve the law and order delivery of justice in Pakistan, which suffers at the moment.
And I think our next question is just here.
Yes, I was just in Pakistan actually a few weeks back and I just returned. And it seems like corruption is becoming much more prevalent in the last few years. And I know when you were in power, you were trying to manage that as best as you could. But it was under your leadership that you actually allowed Benazir Bhutto and Asif Zardari to come back to Pakistan. And I think you were granting them amnesty from their corruption charges at that time. You know, in reading some different articles in The Observer, etc., it appears there may have been a lot of pressure that was put on you from the West to allow that to happen, perhaps because some of the policies of Mrs. Bhutto were a bit more aligned to perhaps the national interest of some of the Western countries. I'd just like you to comment on those issues.
Yes, first of all, corruption. Yes, it is rampant today, but I strongly believe that corruption starts, or influence of corruption starts from the top. And there was one study that we carried out initially in 1999 when I came on the scene to see how the CBR, the revenue collection body of Pakistan, there was corruption there, why is there corruption? And we came to a conclusion that 10% of people are incorruptible, they will never be corrupt. 10% of the people are incorrigible, they will always be corrupt. And 80% are wavering, seeing the top. So we need to affect that 80% and sort out the 10% who are incorrigible. So it is doable if you set the example from the top. And frankly, I am very proud of the fact that in the first 3 years of my governance, where I selected people, they were not elected, I selected them. And I was wearing 4 hats. I was the Army Chief, I was the Chairman, Joint Chief of Staff Committee, and I was the Prime Minister as the Chief Executive and the President. There was no corruption, frankly, hardly any, maybe some that I didn't know. But we created an institution called National Accountability Bureau, NAB. But then this NAB, even in an environment of Pakistan, when we started implementing realistically, and my orders to them to catch the rich and powerful, not the lower ones. Because the lower ones, there are many social issues because of which they take these minor bribes. It is the rich and powerful who have all the resources, yet they are corrupt. So we decided to get them. But then a lot of things happened that when we moved against the bankers who had given loans on corrupt grounds, they stopped giving loans then. And when we moved against industrialists who had taken loans and defaulted, the industry started collapsing and the people started running away with their money. So there was a massive flight of capital. When we started moving against bureaucrats who were involved with the bankers in the corruption, they stopped giving decisions because they would be hauled up by the NAB. So therefore one had to be a little more pragmatic then to get the money back, to sort of be more pragmatic instead of be too idealistic in checking corruption. So these were the problems that one faced in eradicating corruption. Eradication of corruption is possible at the top level to a large extent, but at the bottom level, every developing country has corruption because of other, as I said, on the pay scales. If a person cannot make 2 ends meet, if he cannot look after the security of his family, the children during service, and have a comfortable living after service, he will be corrupt. So those are state issues which need to be addressed before demanding honesty at the lower level. But then the other point that you made about return of Benazir and Nawaz Sharif, yes, I had decided on a 3-stage transition to democracy. I always believed that democracy is what is required in any country. dictatorship is not an answer. Although many people asked me that you should continue. But I decided that no, we've had martial laws in the past, and martial law comes and sits over the civil administration when they leave, which they have to, one time or the other. The civil administration remains at the same bottom level. So I decided not to impose martial law. I didn't impose martial law. I allowed the entire civil machinery to function, and I asked the army we introduced a monitoring system from the side to monitor how the civil administration is functioning and to make sure that they function well. So I was getting reports from two channels, the civil channel, the normal channels, and the military channel wherever there is some lack of functioning efficiency. So that is what I did. And then for the first 3 years, the next 5 years was elected government, because I was given 3 years by the Supreme Court. With hindsight, maybe I should have asked for 5 more years actually, because 9/11 came in and I was distracted from all the reforms that I needed to introduce in Pakistan to improve the institutional capacity of Pakistan. We did a lot, but many things had to be done. Like I had to restructure the government, we had to restructure the civil services, we had to restructure the formation of the states, of the provinces of Pakistan. So there was a lot to be done, which I had to pen. In the next, after these 5 years, I thought I was the Chief of Army Staff and the President. In the next 5 years, I thought after the elections, I will shed my uniform and be a civilian president for the next 5 years and monitor the effectiveness of the government and then fade away. But it was the last stage, the third stage, which went awry, which was the problem area. And it went awry because Benazir Bhutto broke an agreement with me. I didn't want these politicians, Benazir and Nawaz Sharif, to come back to Pakistan. And I had a deal with her. And she promised that she will not come. And I told her, you will not come. In exchange for the cases, the corruption cases against them. Unfortunately, that also went against me because I allowed that. I shouldn't have allowed that also. But she was not supposed to come back. She broke that agreement. She came before the elections. And then when she came before the elections, there was a demand from Nawaz Sharif and Saudi Arabia that he should also be allowed to return. So he was also allowed to return. And then all confusion started. And that third stage transition became totally unstable. And therefore, I needed to quit, and I quit it. That led to all this confusion, and now I think I knew that it's going to create all this trouble because I know the potential of all of them. They have governed twice before, in the 90s, and I know how they governed. I know where they took Pakistan, each one of them, People's Party and Nawaz Sharif. So now they want to govern, it's the People's Party which is governing the third time, and Nawaz Sharif wants to govern the third time. I know his capabilities, and I call him a closet Taliban. And therefore, I believe that for the sake of Pakistan, one has to create this another political alternative. Although I personally am very comfortable giving these talks and all around this world. I go around all over the world. I go to Singapore, I go to Hong Kong and China, and I was in Stockholm, and I was in Nigeria and Lagos and here. So I'm very comfortable coming for these talks and doing well for myself. But then I believe that there's a cause larger than, higher than self, and that is the country. And therefore, in spite of all the risks that I do understand it takes, I say there is no risk, and no risk, no gain. Gain is always related to the risk you take. So I'm prepared to take the risks.
Thank Thank you. We just have time for one or two more questions if we have anyone out there. Okay, on that side.
President Basharov, it's an honor to hear you speak, and your presentation resonates with me personally. I was fortunate enough to spend 6 years living in Asia and traveling through it, many of the countries. I have two quick questions for you. For our better understanding, what would be a reasonable estimate of the average annual income of a household in Pakistan?
Average annual income of
Yes.
a household in Pakistan?
Yes.
Well, our per capita income was $350 when I took over, roughly, I remember. And we raised it to over $1,000 in 6 years. I believe that is the state. Our per capita income is over $1,000. But however, that is not a great indication of the income of a household. I think it's a rough indication, all right. But in these 2 years, the state in which Pakistan is now, where the factories have 50%, more than 50% of our factories have closed down, therefore unemployment has increased. Therefore, whereas in a family, if there were 5 people eligible to work, only 2, in my time, only almost 4 or 5 of them were working and earning. Now I am told that there are only 1 or 2 who are earning. So the earning of people has reduced. Inflation has increased manifold. From the poorest of the poor, the items, food items that they have to procure for themselves have increased in price by about 400%, 4 times. Unfortunately. So therefore the condition of the people is deplorable, is miserable. People are committing suicide, and those who have money want to quit Pakistan. This is the state of affairs, where the poorest of the poor have been hit, and the middle class, which I was trying to expand actually. As the base of Pakistan, I was trying to expand the middle class. The middle class has been hit especially, and they are going into the poor lot. So this is the condition in which we find Pakistan today.
And under these circumstances, the concept of the rule of law and law enforcement has a completely different complexion, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
The concept of the rule of law and law enforcement and so on has a completely different complexion in this kind of an economic environment, does it not?
Yes, certainly. People are agitating, people are out on the streets, even on the energy issue. There is no electricity in Pakistan. There is load shedding for 18 hours out of 24 hours. And the problem is not that there is no energy generation capacity. I know that there is 19,500 megawatts of electricity generating capacity of Pakistan today. And the total requirement of Pakistan, because the industry has closed down, commercial activity is less than half. So therefore, the total requirement today is only about 14,000 megawatts. And they are generating only 10,000. I know that also. Because of a circular debt. Because those who are using electricity are not paying to the power producers. Therefore, the power producers are not paying their gas and oil bills. And therefore, gas and oil is not being given to them. Therefore, most of the power producing is at a standstill. Now, that is bringing people out on the streets in the heat. No fans, no air conditioning. And in the winters, no fire. So these are problems that the whole population is facing: energy crisis, food prices, inflation, and unemployment. These 3 issues. And I know that basically the unity, the bond in people, where there is diversity, because Pakistan is a country with many diversities. We have ethnic diversities, we have sectarian diversity, we have linguistic diversity, we have religious diversities, then we have feudal diversities, tribal diversities. To gel such a country with diverse realities, economic well-being of people is the basis of gelling them. And that is what is breaking. And therefore there are centrifugal forces which are operating to break away. So my solution to the problem, strike at the economy of Pakistan. We have to set it right. And as I said, it is doable. It is doable when, if I was to tell you my experience, when I came into power, I knew nothing of economy. Believe me when I say that, I knew nothing of economy. I didn't even understand what is GDP and debt to GDP ratios and all that the economists used to throw these jargons at me. And when I started getting into details of fiscal deficit and what is fiscal deficit, it is just a balance, the issue of earnings versus your spendings. And it has to be balanced. Your earnings must be your spending must be compatible with earnings. And when I looked into fiscal deficit, I checked what is the earning, and that was the revenue. And revenue base was so low. In 52 years till 1999, our revenue collection was 308 billion rupees. And from 2000 to 2006, I took it from 308 billion to 1 trillion. We crossed 1 trillion in 6 years, as opposed to 52 years. That was because we broadened the base and did not increase taxes. That is doable. And then reduced the expenditure. I froze the defense expenditure. I reduced government expenditure. So fiscal deficit got all right. On the balance of payment deficit, we had to earn from exports. It was miserable. Our exports were just about 7 billion. We took it to $18.5 billion. On FDI, foreign direct investment, which was at $400 million, we took it to $8.4 billion. On remittances from Pakistanis abroad, it was at $800 million. We took it to $6.5 billion. That is how we turned the balance of payment deficit into a balance of payment surplus. And may I say here to a Canadian crowd that our expenditures mostly was on debt servicing. Our debt service liability, our debts were so high. But the main chunk of the debt was $12.5 billion from the Paris Club. And there were about 12 countries of Paris Club, Canada being one. And may I very proudly say and express my gratitude to Canada. They were the first to write off $400 million of my debt on my request. And the rescheduling. And the rest, United States also wrote off $2 billion. And the rest rescheduled their debts. And that is how the debt service liability from $5.5 billion per annum came down to $2 billion. And that is how we turned the economy around. It is doable again. Because the same things have fallen again. FDI is not coming. Why is it not coming? They have no trust in the government. And in Pakistan. There is a massive flight of capital. Pakistanis have taken their money out. So therefore the dollar has, which we kept at 60 rupees for 8 years, has shot up to 87 rupees. Therefore the inflation. Why? No trust and confidence in the government.
Thank you very much for your remarks.